Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the practical implication of the new CSSF circular on DORA, co-organized by DSM Avocats, Cour, and the Derisk Advisory. I'm with Renaud Le Squeren and Laurent de la Vaissière. Hello. Before we start, could you please write in the chat to confirm that you can see and hear us clearly, so we don't have to do the introduction again. But I think it works perfect. Yes, okay. So we can start. As you can see, you have a chat where only your first name appears. Of course, we can see your last name, but just for you to know. This session follows a first successful webinar in September 2024. And today we'll focus on the new CSSF circular and what it means in practice, especially for regulatory and operational matters. Brief introduction about the two speakers. So Renaud Le Squeren, he's partner at DSM Avocats Cour. He leads the digital team at DSM and has more than 20 years of experience advising on digital transformation, GDPR, platforms, and fintech. He's also vice president of APDL and eCOM, the Luxembourg Federation of Digital. DSM Avocats Cour is a full-service business law firm with more than 45 people. And we also have Laurent de la Vaissière, Managing Director at Derisk Advisory. He has over 20 years of experience in IT audit and regulatory advice. Laurent is an expert in cybersecurity and IT compliance and vice chairman at the Finance Technology Luxembourg. And Derisk is a boutique advisory firm specializing in ICT and cybersecurity. So if you have any questions, we will have a Q&A sessions at the end. You have a tab questions on your screen if you're on your computer, and feel free to use it. We will try to answer some questions at the end. And now I will hand it over to Renaud to start the discussions, and we hope you enjoy the webinar.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure having you with us today. So this is the second webinar or second step dedicated to DORA regulation. In introduction, a quick reminder about what is DORA. So it's a regulation with the aim of strengthening the digital operational resilience of the financial sector. So this regulation was voted in 2022 and came into force on the 17th January this year. It's a lex specialis to the NIS2 directive, but dedicated to the financial sector. So what's the purpose of DORA? To enter directly into the big part. As we already said during the previous webinar, increasing digitalization, concentrating risk with critical ICT third-party provider, complex dependency on subcontractors, loss of skill, loss of bargaining power. So the idea is to force the financial sector to increase its resilience abilities, and to do so, DORA implemented several obligations towards the market. It applies to a large group of large group of companies. You have the list here. This is the same list as the one that we presented during the previous seminar. By the way, if you want to review the previous webinar, it's available on the DSM
YouTube channel. So the point with DORA is that it supersedes the existing regulatory framework that was in Luxembourg. So DORA will cover collaboration with authority, ICT risk management, information sharing, data protection, information security, ICT third-party management, and ICT-related incident notification. Those topics were previously covered by two circulars, the 20750 and the 22806 on outsourcing arrangement. So one was dedicated to the security management, and the second one to the outsourcing arrangement. The point with DORA is that this regulation came into force after the implementation of those circulars, and
quickly everyone realized that there were some comparable general requirements. So topics that are covered were partially similar, such as assessment requirement and city risk management principle, etc. But that there were also discrepancies. Categorization of reportable incident, factors to be considered in the assessment, etc. So, of course, there was on the market in Luxembourg, but not only in Luxembourg, some questions and further questions about what should prevail. So, relatively quickly, if we can say so, 2 days before the day where DORA came into force, there was a publication of the CSSF confirming that DORA regulation should prevail on the existing circular. So this situation was a bit complicated in the sense that for the market, on one side you had the DORA regulation, on the other side you had the circular, which were still applicable unless superseded by DORA regulation. So it's a situation that is absolutely not useful, not efficient, not very complicated for the market. So, of course, everyone was knowing that the CSSF would have to update the existing circular on those two topics. So the outsourcing regulation and the ICT risk management. And this was done in April 25, meaning 4 months after the coming into force of the DORA regulation. And also very recently, last week, on the 28th of May, 3 other circulars were published. So today we will present the circular and the consequences and the way it works of those 3 circulars of April 25, but we will not analyze the one of May 25. We will probably do that in a subsequent webinar. Just to let you know, the one of May does not impact the one of April. At least this is the first good point. So they are covering separate topics. You can see on this slide, the one of May are implementing ESA guidelines on the aggregate annual costs and losses caused by ICT incident. And the one on the reporting of major ICT-related incidents. And there's a modification that is also needed in this context of the Circular 24-847. So today we will focus on the one on the Circular of April 25. So what's the topic of those circulars? On one side, you have the DORA regulation. On the other side, you have the existing circular. This is what I explained in the introduction. The DORA regulation is divided into chapters, and you have on this, you can see on this slide the various chapters. And the idea was to amend the existing circular when needed. And for some topics, there was a need to issue completely new circular. So the CSSF took the view to do that as presented on this slide. So for the Circular 2750 on ICT risk management, 2 circulars have been approved. One is a completely new, the 25880 on relationship management on payment services user and PSP ICT assessment. We will see more detail in a second. And there was an update of the existing circular 2750. And then for the outsourcing arrangement, so the 22806, likewise, one new circular dedicated to DORA entities requirement and the use of ICT third parties, and an update of the existing 22807. So the idea is to make things simple. To be honest, my feeling is that it's not a success. because in terms of simplification, the way it has been implemented makes things quite complicated to understand first where you are, which circular apply to you, and secondly, and this is where Laurent will enter more into details, on the details themselves, on what you have to do if you fall under this or that circular. But fourth, just a quick reminder of the time frame. Clearly, to us, this time frame is really questionable. But not only at the level of Luxembourg. So it's not only an issue for Luxembourg, for the CSSF, and for the Luxembourgish market. It is a global issue in Europe, and you can see on this slide that so it's focused on the Luxembourg aspect. So you can see the dates of implementation of the various existing circular prior DORA, then publication of DORA. Then you can see that the European Banking Authority published guidelines that are also after the coming into force of DORA, because it was in February this year. And one of the 4 circulars that were released in April directly relates to this ABR guidelines. So you can see that for the market, everyone had to be to comply with DORA in January, whereas the rules to comply with DORA are little by little coming into force. So this is really an issue, and this is a really questionable time frame, meaning that for the companies who already did the work according to DORA, as they could do that with the information available before January 25, they will have to reassess and do a second time the same work, or partially the same work, not to comply, not with DORA, but with the circular, and with the little differences that you can see. And as you know, little differences can have big effects. So unfortunately, and again, this is really unfortunate, but what has been done must be reassessed now, at least partially. So the scope of those circular, because the first point and the next slide, this slide and the next slides will focus on this, trying to determine which circular applies to you. And only this, in theory, simple question is extremely complex. So the CSSF approach is to divide things by circular. And there's a main distinction between DORA and non-DORA entities. So those 4 new circulars, they will amend the scope of the existing circular 22,806 and 2750. And there are 2 new circulars, one dedicated to the third-party services provider, one dedicated to the risk management. So you must know that for some circular, they apply to DORA only entities. For some, they apply to DORA and non-DORA, and this is where it becomes a bit complex. So first, as I just mentioned, you have to qualify the type of entity you are. Are you a DORA entity or a non-DORA entity? And then you have to apply which sector are you thinking about? Are you thinking about ICT and risk management, or are you thinking about outsourcing? Because there are 2 main perimeters with separate obligation and rules. So if we start with ICT and security risk management, so the 2 circulars related to this, you have on one side the circular that applies to DORA only. Then there is the circular 25880, which is a new one, which applies to DORA and non-DORA entity, but limited to payment service providers only. And as you know, payment service providers can be DORA and non-DORA entities. And then there is the amended, the updated Circular 2750, which will continue to apply, but only to non-DORA entities. So our opinion is you first have to, as I just mentioned, you first have to define whether you're DORA or non-DORA entity to find which circular applies to you. Same reasoning for outsourcing. Are you a DORA entity? But then, if you are a DORA entity for the outsourcing, you will also have to define what is the scope, what is the activity you're thinking about. For ICT outsourcing, and you have the definitions in the circular, there is this new circular 25882 that will apply. But for business processing outsourcing, then you will continue to apply the amended, the new one, the amended 22806 part 1 only. That will continue. Then if you are a non-DORA entity, you will apply only the updated 22806 for both BPO and ITO. And here, this includes there are little modifications because under the previous circular, you had to make the contract subject to a law of one state member, which is not the case anymore, and provide residency on the cloud computing services in the EE zone, which is not the case anymore. So you will have to create a matrix. You will have to create a matrix, and this is where you need probably consultancy services, law firms like DSM to help you to define which circular applies to you. And the criteria to do so will be, who are you? Are you a DORA or non-DORA entity? Then what's the activity? For instance, if we are talking about outsourcing, you will have to define if we are dealing with business, so BPO or not, or ITO or not. And depending on the result of this analysis, you will apply this or that circular. So it can be the new circular, one of the new circular, it can be the existing but updated circular. And it's the same reasoning if you are in the third-party services provider scope or if you are in the risk management scope. So let's start with the risk management scope. Then the risk management scope, you will have those two circulars. The first one, and we enter into a bit of details. The first one applies to DORA and non-DORA entities, so the 25880, which is the new one, to payment services user and PSP ICT assessment only. So this new circular implements requirements for relationship management and implements to do so the ABA guidelines, so the European Banking Authority guidelines, so the one that were published in February 25. And then there are also additional requirements regarding annual reporting for the risk assessment, likewise only related to payment services. And then for the other aspects, but only non-DORA entities, for the risk management, you will have to use the updated existing circular, the 2750, where the scope of this circular is reduced to non-DORA entity only. Some specific element applicable to the payment services were removed because they were transferred to the other circular. Some sections were deleted, and also integration of the ABA guidelines on risk management. Now, if we move to the third-party services, same logic. You have the new circular 25882. So requirements of the use of ICT third-party services only applies to DORA entity. And then you have the general principle relating to outsourcing, DORA reporting obligations, specific requirements for cloud computing. It's more or less a copy-paste in the right section, in the right place of the DORA review, of the DORA articles, of the existing DORA articles. And then there's the update of the 22.006, where the scope applies to DORA entity, DORA and non-DORA entity, but also to the MANCO Chapter 16. Here, again, distinction between, in this new version, distinction between DORA and non-DORA entity, and deletion of the cloud-specific. So we remove everything that is now in other circular from this one. So in a nutshell, to define which circular will apply to you, it's already a long journey. You will have to define if you are a DORA, non-DORA, you will have to define what are you doing, and you will also have to define within the right circular which chapter applies to you. So again, as in terms of simplification, maybe this could have been done differently. Nevertheless, this is the way it is. So maybe a quick focus on the circular, the new one, 25.0882. This one applies to aims to design, operationalize, and complement the DORA regulation like the other one. So the idea is to make it to make DORA operational, efficient, and on this one there are very important elements that differs from what was existing before. Laurent again will enter into the details in a second, but there is new points that you definitely have to reassess. Prior notification of critical and important ICT function outsourcing, because there have been some changes. The register of information, extremely important and complex. And then completing DORA. So use of third-party ICT services with some additional rules and obligation, professional secrecy, supervision condition. ICT outsourcing for accounting functions, because definition is not that clear, and you do not always fall under the scope, even though you are talking about some accounting functions. So you have to be a bit more into the details. And some of the cloud computing provision of the 22.806 will also apply here. So maybe to conclude my part of this webinar, the first step of your thinking is to define which circular applies to you, and in the circular, which part of this circular, which chapter of this circular applies to you. Again, you will have to reassess what you've done before, unfortunately, but this is the way it is. You will have to create a matrix to define where you are, and with all the circular, does it apply to you? Yes, no, partially, and if partially, which chapter applies to you? And once you are there, then you have to think about what is in each circular that applies to you, and how will you handle this? And this is where, again, as I was saying in introduction, unfortunately, you will have to make to do the job you did the second time, at least partially, and you will probably have to have a bit of support to make the assessment right on what has to be done and not. So now I'll leave the floor to Laurent.
Thanks very much, Renaud. Good morning, everyone. So it's good that you already detailed those important CSSF circular updates, which are relevant to both DORA and non-DORA entities, and building on that wider context, the following sections of this webinar will concentrate specifically on DORA entities. And what are the practical changes they continue to navigate. So building on this focus, a primary area requiring careful adaptation has been in structuring outsourcing policies to effectively integrate DORA's specific rules for ICT services alongside established general outsourcing frameworks like Circular CSSF 22806. This circular based on EBA guidelines on outsourcing arrangements, which won't be updated until the second half of this year as per EBA work program, remains a cornerstone for overall outsourcing governance. At the same time, as I mentioned already, DORA introduced those highly detailed, prescriptive, and specific requirements exclusively for the use of ICT services. And here I'm thinking about additional risks to be considered as part of risk assessments, criteria to be considered in service providers' due diligence, notably in case of subcontracting, requirements to be addressed in contractual agreements, again, notably in case of subcontracting, and exit plans in case the ICT services support critical or important functions. In this context, merging both frameworks into one policy seems impractical. It would lead to an overly complex, lengthy, potentially confusing document. It would likely be difficult for different internal stakeholders to navigate, for example, IT versus a business unit outsourcing a non-ICT function. And it's harder to ensure comprehensive coverage and maintain, update efficiently these documents. So therefore, in our experience, the leading market practice has been to adopt distinct policies. On one hand, a delegated policy on the use of ICT third-party providers, specifically addressing DORA, and on the other hand, a general outsourcing policy covering non-ICT outsourcing, like traditional business process outsourcing, remaining aligned primarily with Circular CSSF 22806, and potentially referencing some of your ICT policies. I have a first important point of attention for those policies is to make sure they include the latest definition of ICT services. In early 2025, I think after the 17th of January, going back to your introduction, Renaud, the European Commission finally helped answer Q&A to clarify this. And this is particularly relevant when financial entities provide services which have an ICT component, and that this service provision is financial entity to financial entity. The main question is, should the service be classified as a DORA ICT service or as a business process outsourcing? And the European Commission guidance states that the receiving entity needs to assess two things. Firstly, does the service meet DORA's definition of an ICT service? And secondly, are the financial entity providing the service and the financial service itself regulated? The results of this assessment is very important. If both answers are yes, meaning it is an ICT service component within a regulated financial services provided by a regulated financial entity, it is generally considered predominantly a financial service, that is a BPO, and this would typically not be subject to DORA specific ICT third-party rules, but to general outsourcing guidelines. However, if a regulated financial entity provides an ICT service that is unrelated to its core regulated financial service, then it's considered an ICT service under DORA. In Luxembourg, the CSSF communiqué of 9 April 2025 supports this view and make it clear it applies with some very specific exceptions around support PSFs in Luxembourg. Therefore, a clear action is to review and, if needed, update your outsourcing and hopefully separate ICT third-party policy to ensure they accurately reflect the specific definition, which act as a guiding criteria between the two sets of rules. On the second key point for those policies is the importance of ensuring your ICT third-party policy specifically integrates Luxembourg national requirements. Renaud already touched on this. It's important to understand DORA compliance is defined at EU level. It's very extensive, but it's not the full picture for Luxembourg. There are some local rules which remain binding, such as the necessity to strictly comply with the legal obligation of professional secrecy if it applies to your entity. I'm thinking about Article 41 of the law on the financial sector and of the equivalent article in the law on payment services. Secondly, the specific supervisory condition that need to be met if you use a third party based in Luxembourg, established in Luxembourg, for ICT management or operational services. And this also includes resource operation of cloud environments. Thirdly, for accounting systems located outside of Luxembourg, a backup of the accounting positions is required within the European Economic Area. And here we're talking about a backup of the data of the accounting position, not a backup of the accounting system or a disaster recovery of this system. It's just the data. Finally, the CSSF has outlined specific cloud computing nuances historically, and we keep, there is some simplification, but we keep the definition of cloud computing. We keep the expectations around the roles of resource operator and cloud officer, and it's important to ensure that your cloud arrangements and related governance align with those local requirements. Therefore, again, a clear action is to thoroughly review, customize the policies accordingly to ensure you have full compliance, both EU level DORA and Luxembourg level, those specific requirements. Third point of attention today addresses the broadened scope of ex-ante notifications to the CSSF for ICT third-party arrangements. And that's defined in Circular CSSF 25A2. It's important that your third-party policy reflects this change. Previously, notifications to the CSSF often focused on traditional run services or fully outsourced IT functions, which typically carry clear operational risks. However, with DORA now fully live and interpreted locally through this Circular 25A2, the scope of these notifications is wider. It potentially covers any ICT services that support one of your critical or important functions using the DORA register types as a reference point. And we had a slide on those 19 services in the webinar from last year, and you have it as a reference here. As you can see, it's extremely broad. So let's consider the example on the slide. Procuring a new commercial off-the-shelf software that will support one of your critical or important functions that you will install in your existing ICT environment. Even if this arrangement is primarily for software licensing, so probably something classified under DORA's ICT services as S13. It now requires careful attention. While such licensing arrangement, even with ongoing support or updates from the vendor, might present a different, perhaps less immediate operational risk profile compared to those traditional comprehensively outsourced run services, if the overall arrangement qualifies as an ICT service supporting that critical or important function, then these two may now need to be notified to the CSSF, possibly up to 3 months in advance. Therefore, again, clear action is to ensure that your policies, your procedures accurately reflect this expanded scope and that you have the right triggers to make sure that the rules are complied with. Second topic in this section is the DORA Register of Information. As Renaud mentioned, it's an extremely important topic and also a permanent cornerstone of the new regulatory framework. because this tool is important for entities to manage their ICT third-party risk, and for supervisors like the CSSF and the European Supervisory authorities to understand systemic dependencies. Reflecting on operationalizing this register, the first data collection was a significant undertaking. The required granularity, extensive data points, ambitious timelines, and need for new processes and systems presented substantial learning curve and challenge for all financial entities. And turning to the role of the European supervisory authorities during this initial demanding phase of the DORA register, I have a couple comments to share. I'm not talking about the CSSF here, but really of the European level. So while official detailed statistics on the quality and timeliness of first-round submissions weren't made public, the sheer volume and iterative nature of the FAQs published by the European supervisory authorities clearly demonstrates the widespread interpretation challenges and practical data gathering hurdles the market has been facing. The subsequent adjustment to submission deadlines was frankly essential. For many in the industry, this felt like a proactive accommodation and more like a necessary reaction to the very real operational strain and the significant risk of widespread data quality issues as the original highly ambitious timelines being strictly enforced. And ultimately, these responses, while providing crucial breathing space, also underscored the initial disconnect between the regulatory text and the operational reality, highlighting a steep learning curve and perhaps an initial underestimation of the implementation burden for all stakeholders. That initial period of intense learning around data requirements, timelines, and clarifications has set the stage for today's focus, which is highlighted on the current slide. And the clear message now is the DORA register is a permanent continuous obligation for all ICT third-party arrangements. It's very important for your own TPD risk management and for the regulators for their oversight, especially regarding critical ICT third-party providers, the so-called CTPs. So building on these lessons, the supervisory bar is expected to rise further. As the slide indicates, initial flexibility on data quality and timelines has ended. Firms must prepare for ongoing supervisory tightening. This means firm expectations for data integrity, accuracy, completeness, and consistency not being negotiable anymore, and for deadline adherence, where delays are unlikely to be accepted without very strong justification. This increased rigor is because the supervisor depends on high-quality, timely register data to execute their DORA mandates and protect financial stability. This reality informs the slide's next points: market best practices, consequences of deficiencies, and the strong case for robust technology. And I would like to share the experience of one of our clients in Luxembourg, which chose to equip itself with a robust system in early 2025. Well, it's important to be realistic. The system didn't magically eliminate the internal efforts to identify, gather, validate all underlying data points, but that foundational work remained obviously with the financial entity. However, once that groundwork was done, the system benefits were clear. It ensured comprehensive and logically structured data capture, compliant from the outset. A significant advantage was the virtually effortless generation of the technical CSV submission file in the precise EDA ITS format, automating what can be a complex, error-prone manual task. And the tangible result was a quick confirmation from the authorities that the submission of this client was technically sound and satisfactory, which allowed to focus on more value-added tasks than just reporting mechanics. So moving on to another section, now that we've outlined key aspects and impacts of the new DORA circulars, it's important to understand how these requirements will be supervised in practice. So first and fundamentally, the CSSF employs a risk-based approach to prioritization. This isn't new in principle, but it's critically applied in the DORA context. And to put it simply, the supervisory attention given to a large digital bank with extensive customer-facing online services and complex ICT dependencies is going to naturally differ from the one given to a small, less systematically important investment fund manager, which follows a full delegation model. This ensures the oversight is both targeted and efficient. And to evaluate how financial entities are implementing their DORA obligations, the CSSF employs several key assessment methodologies, starting with off-site supervision, which is a continuous process, which involves analysis of a wide range of inputs and submissions from the financial institutions, SAQs, yearly reports from internal control functions, from the auditor, notifications of major ICT-related incidents or security incidents, notification regarding use of ICT third parties, and of course, the register of information. We also have on-site supervision, which involves the CSSF going directly into financial entities, and these inspections can vary in scope and focus. Firstly, there are some focused on-site inspections, which cover one or more category of IT risk. And there are also broader on-site inspection, which may touch ICT and security risk, notably those corporate governance on-site inspection, notably for investment fund managers, which now invariably include scrutiny of DORA-related governance and oversight. So just to give some context, based on the information typically found in the CSSF Sandbox report, we see the volume of those on-site inspections in the past years, and there's around 9-10 on-site inspections focused on IT risk, and many wider inspections which touch those topics. Last but not least, thematic reviews, which focus on specific topics and which have been mainly approached through surveys on specific topics like DORA readiness or the use of artificial intelligence. So there is obviously some supervisory dialogue, Q&A on submissions. Maybe in the interest of time, one important example here is that nowadays I see some case officers asking follow-up questions, specifically on submissions touching DORA, and also more strategic discussions such as case officers and management of supervision departments engaging with members of the management body to understand their comfort level with the institution's DORA compliance. Of course, alongside dialogue and guidance, there's an enforcement strategy. Here we have, for your reference, the past highest penalty, which has been issued prior to the new DORA regime, which has been updated in the summer of July 2024, with an update to the law of July 2019, which operationalizes European financial sector regulations. So very significant maximum theoretical sanctions can be applied by the CSSF. Last but not least, harmonization and cooperation, which simply shows there is a lot of coordination, a lot of dialogue between the CSSF and its counterparts and the European supervisory authorities. So to close this webinar, we have a short section on open questions and interpretation challenges. The first topic we wanted to raise was the principle of proportionality. So that's a core principle in the regulation. It's the Article 4 of the main regulation. It's reinforced in several DORA policy products. And it allows financial entities basically to scale their compliance efforts according to their size, overall risk profile, nature, scale, complexity of their services, activities, and operations. And the important point here is the governance for applying proportionality. This isn't just a recommendation, it's a fundamental expectation under DORA that has significant practical implications on how your institution operates. Essentially, what this means is that simply stating we've applied proportionality isn't enough. Financial entities are expected to go a step further and formally define their own internal governance arrangements that dictate how they will make decisions about and justify their use of this principle of proportionality. And another interesting topic is yet again on the definition of ICT services and notably the software licensing type of ICT services. And as you can see on the slide, Germany's National Competent Authority, BaFin, published an FAQ on ICT third-party risk that directly tackles the question of whether an isolated software purchase constitutes an ICT service under DORA. And their answer provides a key distinction. They state that generally, pure software licenses are usually rights of use that do not constitute an ICT service. So the simple acquisition of a right to use software in isolation might not trigger DORA's ICT service provider rules. But however, and this is the critical part, BaFin immediately follows up by saying there are often accompanying ICT services to this right of use, such as maintenance, such as support contracts, and these accompanying services would indeed fall under the definition of an ICT service because they have an ongoing nature. So, I mean, the key lesson here is that it's important to note BaFin's view. While it's from a foreign regulator, it offers a significant reference point from a major EU national competent authority on a very common DORA interpretation challenge and signals how some authorities are thinking about this nuance between a bare product and a product bundled with ongoing services. So let's hope that the CSSF will follow up with some more precise guidance on this point. And in its absence, it's critical to have a well-documented internal position on this. And you should ensure that your specific arrangements are assessed against DORA's text in order to build a clear and defensible internal position on whether your software licenses are indeed ICT services under DORA.
So since the beginning of this webinar, you can ask questions in a dedicated place in Livestorm. So we will review them. For some of them, I already answered. So there was a question about UCI administrator. The answer is in Circular 25/002. So I think this is covered. Then we have a question. Do you expect big gaps, changes with the NIS2 implementation under Luxembourg law? I do think with Circular 24/804 expected update after NIS2 implementation. And from my point of view, mitigated point is that DORA is lex specialis and is not lex generalis, which is correct and which is what we mentioned. Maybe Laurent, you want to answer? Do we expect? I mean, basically, we don't.
In the Luxembourg financial sector, NIS2 is going to be a topic for some of the support PSFs. period. So it's not a topic for banks. It's not a topic for financial market. There's been a clear position of the European Commission on this. It took a while to issue it. But yeah, so these two, it's for support PSS.
When it comes to the financial sector, there was, it could cover also other type of companies.
Many.
We don't exactly know yet, but we usually don't expect major modification updates because this is not the usual standard of implementation in Luxembourg. But as always, we have to wait for the final outcome, I would say. Our internal control function in banks, critical and important functions under DORA, even if they're not in the list of Annex 1 of the CSSF new notification.
But I think in the first webinar we did on DORA, you rightly explained the definition of critical or important functions were different in Circular 22/06 and in DORA. So it's case by case and to be seen whether specific internal control functions meets the criteria of critical or important functions as per DORA for a particular financial institution.
So we just put in the chat the link to our previous webinar on this topic. So to conclude with our presentation, as you can see, this is a very challenging situation. Some additional work will have to be done, even though it was done before, because of the first, as I mentioned, and it was my part, you will have to define which circular applies to you, which is the first step and not an easy one. And then the last question we had to answer is the perfect illustration. For some situation, it will be a case-by-case assessment, whether you will fall under the scope of this or that circular. And then thanks to Laurent, you have several points of attention on what has been, what should be reviewed first and more carefully, maybe in your companies, in your entities, in order to align with those new regulations. So to conclude, thank you everyone for participating to this webinar. It was a pleasure for us to prepare it together with Laurent and to animate it. Probably we will organize something in the coming weeks about the new circular, even though I'm not sure the content of those circular will need a 1-hour session, but we will think again, as we always do, on the concrete and operational impact that they might have in your companies. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.